Imagine trying to map like the entire human experience. I mean, to do it, you would need the rigid, non-negotiable borders of modern nations.
Right, you'd need the whole geopolitical grid.
Yeah, and you would need the terrifying bureaucratic blueprints of state-sponsored genocides. But then you would probably also need the exact street address of a vegan co-op in Fresno, California.
Sitting right alongside, an ancient catalog of Aztec and Zuni languages.
Exactly. And looking at the stack of sources you've handed over to us for this deep dive today, well, that is exactly the dizzying map we are looking at.
Yeah, it is.
It's this wild A to Z list of global nations sitting next to a directory of Southern California communes, and it's all crossed with a massive database of Native American tribes.
It looks completely disjointed at first glance, I know. But there is a very deliberate through line here.
Okay, lay it out for us.
What you've provided is basically a comprehensive study of how humanity attempts to draw boundaries. It's about the fundamental mechanisms of organization,
Right.
like how we build macrostructures, modern nations and academic disciplines, but also how those exact same administrative structures can be weaponized in the darkest failures of humanity.
Yeah. Which is heavy, but so important to look at.
Exactly. And then how people react to those failures by actively retreating to intentional micro-societies, or by relying on ancient, fluid networks that outlast any empire.
Well, let's start with the macrostructures, because the first source here acts almost like the source code for modern civilization.
Yeah, the geographical data.
Right. It's a directory titled Countries and Regions of the World. But what's fascinating isn't just the list of countries. It's the intense, almost obsessive mechanism of labeling everything multiple times.
Depending completely on your vantage point, yeah.
Uh-huh.
The categorization logic is incredibly dense.
Oh, for sure.
The data doesn't just present a single universal identifier for a location. It assigns an English name, a French name, and then a localized name.
Meaning the label itself is entirely relative. Like, if you are standing in Armenia, you aren't in Armenia, you are in Hayastan.
Right. And Germany is Deutschland.
Exactly. And the Holy See, which, most people just think of as Vatican City, is logged with its formal Latin designation, Status Civitatis Vaticani.
It's extremely formal.
Yeah. The source data even goes as far as extracting visual markers, embedding the English and French flags as part of the classification matrix. It is this inflexible, highly formalized grid.
Which is really the architecture of human borders at work. The geopolitical map relies on language, visual symbols, and geographic coordinates to build this rigid framework of reality.
Mm-hmm.
And that compulsion to categorize, it doesn't stop at physical geography. The sources show that we apply that exact same sorting algorithm to human thought.
You're referring to the academic disciplines list.
Yeah, exactly.
We have a separate document that categorizes the entirety of human knowledge into neat, distinct folders: economics and accounting, law and government, therapy and counseling.
Sociology and anthropology, fine arts, engineering.
Right, administration and management, all of it.
It basically functions as the administrative blueprint of modern society. By compartmentalizing knowledge into these disciplines, a state can effectively manage millions of people.
Because you need engineering to build the infrastructure.
Right, and law and government to maintain order, and administration to run the bureaucracy.
Wait, let me challenge that premise for a second, though.
Go for it.
Drawing borders and creating an economics department isn't inherently malicious, right? It's just how we distribute resources and keep the lights on. It's the basic operating system of civilization.
That's true.
So if we have these advanced, highly structured fields dedicated to law and therapy and sociology, shouldn't that operating system naturally produce a peaceful, functioning geopolitical map?
Well, I mean, you would hope so. But an algorithm only executes the instructions it's given. It just sorts data.
Okay, fair.
And the text from the Global Atlas of Geopolitics explicitly addresses this juxtaposition you're pointing out. It notes that our structured systems of knowledge exist in the exact same timeline and geographical space as the darkest failures of humanity.
Wow.
Yeah.
Because when you categorize human beings with the same clinical detached efficiency that you use to categorize, say, economics and accounting, you create a massive systemic vulnerability.
Because if you can define a group on a spreadsheet, you can target them.
Precisely. To understand the full scope of human organization, the sources mandate that we look at what happens when state structures are weaponized.
Right. When the algorithm of the state is fed instructions to isolate, deport or eliminate.
Yes, and the documentation you provided does not shy away from this. It details a really grim history of global atrocities and government-sanctioned genocides.
Yeah, it's a tough read.
Yeah.
But looking at the facts laid out here, the underlying thread isn't random chaos or the breakdown of society. It's the exact opposite.
Right.
It is the hyper-organization of society.
The mechanism of state power is absolutely what we need to focus on here. Take the events beginning in 1915 within the Ottoman Empire.
Right. The government issued explicit orders targeting ethnic Armenians, Assyrians, and Greeks. This wasn't a localized riot. It was a full deployment of state resources. Through forced deportation marches, massacres, and disease, over 1 million people were systematically killed by 1923.
It's staggering, and we see that same bureaucratic machinery scaled up during the Holocaust, right?
Cool.
After 1933, the Nazi Party implemented the final solution.
Which was an administrative project aimed at ethnically purifying Germany.
Yeah. They used census data, academic classifications, and meticulous record-keeping to murder 6 million Jews and 5 million others,
Right.
classifying groups like Slavs, Roma, the disabled, Jehovah's Witnesses, and political dissidents as targets for elimination.
The state used its macro structure to clearly define an us and a them, and then deploy the full weight of its industrial and administrative capacity against them.
Yeah.
And this pattern, utilizing the tools of civilization for destruction, it continues into the later 20th century.
Cambodia is perhaps the most glaring example of this mechanism turning on the academic disciplines we discussed earlier.
Oh, absolutely.
In 1975, when the Khmer Rouge took control, they initiated a re-education campaign. And it's no coincidence that they specifically targeted the educated class.
Right. Doctors, teachers, students.
Anyone suspected of participating in that structured system of knowledge was singled out for torture at places like the Tuol Sleng prison.
Yeah.
Between 1.7 and 2 million Cambodians died. They weren't just killing individuals, they were systematically erasing the knowledge architecture of the country.
And the sources mapped this systemic failure across different continents and decades, too. In Rwanda in 1994, pre-existing civil war tensions were ignited by the death of President Juvenal Habyarimana in a plane crash.
Right.
That event catalyzed an organized, nationwide campaign of violence by the Hutu majority against the Tutsi minority and moderate Hutus. And the speed and scale of that violence relied heavily on pre-existing administrative structures like ethnic ID cards.
It's that same weaponization of administration. And the map of atrocities also points to the breakup of Yugoslavia starting in 1991.
Right.
By 1992, Bosnia and Herzegovina declared independence and became the focal point of the conflict. The text outlines how Serb forces utilized campaigns of ethnic cleansing against Bosnian and Croatian civilians in controlled areas,
Resulting in an estimated 100,000 deaths.
Yeah. Again, it was a redrawing of borders through violence.
And finally, the text brings us to Darfur, where the government of Sudan, under President Omar al-Bashir, executed a genocide against Darfuri civilians. 300,000 people were murdered, and over 2 million were displaced, with state-coordinated attacks spreading to the Abyei territory, South Kordofan, and Blue Nile.
Hearing the sheer scale of these events laid out is staggering, but it fundamentally shifts how we view that first set of sources.
How so?
Well, we see phrases in the text like highly organized strategy, re-education, and organized campaign. It reveals the terrifying duality of human organization. The administration and management skills that build hospitals and universities are the exact same tools used to orchestrate concentration camps and ethnic cleansing.
Which forces us to ask a really nation state can fail so catastrophically. If the algorithm can be turned against its own citizens with lethal efficiency, how do people react?
Right.
When faith in the massive geopolitical matrix is broken, what is the survival mechanism?
You shrink the radius.
Exactly.
And this is where the subject material takes what seems like, honestly, a wild pivot, but logically it is the only natural progression. We zoom all the way down from the failures of global geopolitics to a highly specific directory of intentional communities in Southern California.
The granularity of this list is such a stark contrast to the sweeping national borders we just discussed.
Yeah, it really is.
It charts deliberate microsocieties across a vast geographical spread, measuring exact distances. You have communities sitting just 4.8 miles away in Long Beach, all the way out to Fresno, which is logged at a distance of 250 miles.
And the vividness of these names paints a completely different picture of human organization.
Oh, definitely.
You have the HMS Possibility, operated by an entity known as the Ship on Westmoreland Boulevard in Los Angeles.
Right.
Sitting in the same directory are the Sugar Shack, the Los Angeles Eco Village, the Region Co-op of Pomona, and the Down-to-Earth EcoShare out in Hemet.
And it's not simply a collection of environmental projects or shared housing either. The directory catalogs a complete spectrum of micro-societies, including heavily spiritually focused groups,
Like which ones?
like the Morningland Monastery in Long Beach, the Sweetwater Zen Center in National City, and multiple locations for the 12 Tribes communities in Vista and the Morningstar Ranch in Valley Center.
But are these groups just engaging in escapism? I mean, you might look at a directory of California eco-villages and think they are just modern hippie retreats hitting the reset button because they don't want to deal with modern society.
Yeah, I can see why people would think that.
It feels like they are just drawing a tiny circle around a single address, like 777 Camino Pescadero for the Santa Barbara Student Housing Co-op, and pretending the rest of the world doesn't exist.
It's not escapism, though. It is a highly rational socio-political mechanism. Think about the cognitive load of trying to influence a macro nation of 300 million people.
It's impossible.
It really is. These intentional communities are a localized attempt to reclaim the knowledge architecture we analyzed in the first segment.
Oh, interesting.
They are practicing their own versions of therapy, sociology, agriculture, and administration on a scale where they can actually control the inputs and the outcomes.
So instead of relying on a giant nation state that might weaponize its administration against them, they are building a lifeboat.
Yes.
They are constructing a bespoke algorithm for survival, completely free from the shadow of large-scale geopolitical conflicts.
They are managing their own civic inputs. By keeping the scale small, they neutralize the threat of unchecked state power.
Wow.
But while these California co-ops feel like a very modern reaction to the anxieties of the 21st century, the final source in the stack proves that this localized, community-driven approach is actually the original blueprint of the continent.
Right. We transition from a directory of modern microsocieties to a massive A to Z catalog of Native American tribes and languages. And the sheer volume of this data completely outpaces the modern geopolitical map we started with.
Because the modern map relies on a handful of rigid national borders in North America. This indigenous directory reveals a deeply complex pre-existing network of human organization that thrived without those rigid boundaries.
And to understand the scope of this network, you only have to look at the diversity across the alphabet. In the A's, the text lists the Abenaki, the Algonquin, and the Apache. Moving through the directory, you find the Haudenosaunee, the Pipil, the Aztec. It extends all the way down to the Yucatec Maya, the Zapotec, and the Zuni.
Notice how the categorization of these tribes differs fundamentally from how modern states categorize themselves.
Yeah, how so?
Well, the modern nations required distinct, non-overlapping labels and visual flags to assert their existence.
Right, but the tribal list operates on a completely different logic. It is entirely fluid. Many of the groups have multiple names or spelling variations sitting right next to each other in the data.
Exactly.
The Ojibwa are also listed as the Ojibwe and the Ojibwe-Moan. The Papago are cross-referenced with the Tohono O'odham. The Navajo are simultaneously recorded as the Dine, or Dinah. It aggressively resists the inflexible sorting algorithm of the modern state.
Because language and identity in their natural state are fluid, they adapt and overlap.
Yeah.
When communities aren't forced into the unyielding architecture of a nation-state, when they don't have to define a strict us versus them for the sake of an administrative census, identity becomes a spectrum rather than a border wall.
Looking at this massive directory of indigenous languages, it acts almost like a ghost map overlaid on the Americas.
Oh, I love that analogy.
We started this deep dive looking at the hard, non-negotiable borders of modern nations, assuming that was the peak of human organization. But this tribal list proves that complex, enduring societies function on a completely different mechanism, one based on cultural and linguistic resilience rather than bureaucratic force.
Which perfectly synthesizes the entire stack of sources. We've observed that massive macro governments can build incredible systems of knowledge, but they can also twist those systems to cause horrific destruction.
Right.
We've seen that intentional micro-communities offer a localized refuge, a way to reclaim control over daily life. But the cultural roots of these indigenous tribes demonstrate a form of community that outlasts geopolitical boundaries entirely.
Yeah.
The empires rise and fall, but the languages and the localized networks endure.
It is a profound shift in perspective, and it brings this entire exploration right back to your daily life. We've taken you on a sprawling journey today.
We really have.
We started at the absolute highest levels of global geopolitics, deconstructing how the world draws its borders and categorizes knowledge. We analyzed the devastating mechanics of historical genocides, looking at exactly how the administrative tools of the state are weaponized.
We then zoomed the lens all the way in, from a global overview down to a specific co-op in Fresno, to an eco-village in Los Angeles,
Right.
and finally, to the ancient fluid languages of the Zuni and the Aztec that mapped the continent long before the first modern border was ever drawn.
The reality is you are navigating these structures every single day. You are participating in the macro algorithm through your nationality, your passport, and your profession, whether you work in engineering or counseling. But you are also operating in the micro world. Your local neighborhood, the intentional groups you choose to belong to, the hyper-local communities where you actually have influence over the rules.
Which leaves us with a critical thought experiment for you to consider.
Lay it on us.
Based purely on the mechanisms we've unpacked today, seeing how the rigid bureaucratic algorithms of national governments can fail so catastrophically, while localized eco-shires and fluid ancient tribal languages manage to adapt and survive, what will the map of the world actually look like in 300 years?
Will human survival ultimately rely on the massive, heavily armed macro nations we started our discussion with? Or is the future of human organization going to look a lot more like the deeply intentional, tight-knit micro-communities we ended with?
It's a huge question.
It is a question that completely changes how you look at the map of the world. Thank you for handing us this incredible stack of sources and bringing us along on this deep dive. Keep questioning the boundaries around you.